Welcome to Inside Racing. Had celebrated jockey Edgar Britt spent his entire career in Australia, I believe he would have been as big a name as the Darby Munros and Billy Cooks of his generation. As it was, only a handful of his 2000 winners were actually recorded in his home country. Edgar was bitten by the travel bug at an early age. In 1933, at just 19, he accompanied the great horse Wanuka to the United States. In 1935, he took up a contract as stable rider for the Maharaja of Baroda in India, and there he stayed for 10 years. After World War II, Edgar went to England, and there he spent his best years as a jockey. He rode 1,200 winners, including 7 of the great English classics. Edgar Britt is now 86 years of age, as healthy as a cricket, and living on Sydney's northern beaches. As you can imagine, he's got a million fascinating stories, and I'd love you to hear just a few of them. Let's meet a true racing legend. Well, this beautiful oil painting of jockey E. Britt wearing the colours of Lord Allendale in England many years ago is just one of many marvellous items of racing memorabilia in Edgar Britt's home. Edgar, I haven't been in this room for about 15 years. Great to see you again.
Good to have you here, Johnny.
You rode for Lord Allendale and many of the high-profile people in England. Did they get as much enjoyment out of winning a race as a battler?
Well, you'd think they were. You'd think it was the last race in the world, because even a little race, they'd be round at the weighing room and shaking hands with you and thanking you, and all their friends would be around congratulating them. It was always a big thing, even with a small race.
Yeah, so there might have been a little social element involved there somewhere.
Oh, I think so, yes. But a lot of them didn't bet, but some of them liked to have their money on it. Old Lord Carnarvon, one day we were at Hurst Park, and we had a horse in the selling race, and when I came out to get on it, he said, "Oh, we're drawing bad." And I thought his lordship, was losing his residence and all the rest of it, because he said, I'd love to win this race very much. He said, I like racing. He said, you've got to have it to keep Kingsclere going, Yeah. Anyway.
That was the property.
That was
the homestead, yeah.
And he said, you can get across the fence pretty quick. He said, because a lot of the stewards are my friends. So I went out cantering to the post, and I'm thinking, gee, I'm not going to fall into that. Anyway, as I've drawn the outside, and the fence was the fastest ground. It was not any shorter, but it was the fastest going.
He was telling you to knock him down.
Yeah. Well, to make a story short, I did knock him down. I got on the fence, and I won by 5 lengths. I still could have stayed out there and won.
Yeah.
And as we're pulling up, a couple of the jocks who were mates of mine pulled up alongside me. One of them said, "We'll remember that." Harry Carr says, "I'll get square on you."
Hey Edgar, I just heard the chiming clock, which reminds me that when I talk racing with you, the hours pass very quickly. Yeah. So why don't we sit on the bar stool here and relax a bit and reminisce some more?
Okay.
I don't know where to start in talking to Edgar Britt. You were apprenticed in Sydney to a man called Mick Polson.
That's right.
Now, was he a good horse trainer?
Yes, he was, yeah. But, being a betting stable, one time when we were having a few winners, there was plenty of money about, but when we were having a rough spin, things weren't too good, and we hadn't been paid for about 6 weeks this particular time, and all the other apprentices and the strappers didn't have any money, so we drew straws who went up in front of the boss.
Yeah.
For the way, of course, I drew the short straw.
Yeah.
I had to go up in front of him, and I said, "Boss, the boys haven't got any money." This was on the Friday. I said, "We want to go to the pictures and do a few things." And he said, "Well, son, I'm going to the races tomorrow." He said, I'll back a few winners. We'll have some money when you come home, when I come home." So on waited for him to come home from the races, and I went up and saw him. He said, "Sorry, son, we lost."
We lost. Yeah. Most jockeys remember for the rest of their lives the magic moment of their first win. Your first win, Edgar Britt, was 70 years ago at Canterbury Park on a horse called Gypsy King. How clearly do you remember that magic moment?
Every furlong.
Do you?
Yeah. No jockey ever forgets his first winner.
Was it a long race?
Yeah. It was about 1 mile and 3 furlongs at Canterbury.
Where were you in the run?
Led all the way, drifted off the fence turning into the straight, and one got up inside me, which was, in those days, a terrible thing to let something up inside you.
Yeah.
Anyway, it plugged on and won.
And you've never forgotten it?
No.
Yeah. What sort of a shock does a 19-year-old kid get when the boss says, "Edgar, you're coming to America to ride Wanuka"?
Well, I was highly delighted and felt...
Shocked? Staggered?
Well, amazed, yes. And thought, why didn't they take Jim Pike? But I didn't know at the time, but Jim Pike had been offered the job, but he declined to go.
Did he? Yeah. You went by ship? How long did that take?
3 weeks on the boat.
Goodness me.
San Francisco.
Horse travel well?
Yeah, well, we had, they were sort of deck cargo. We had a stall on the boat, two loose boxes and a little sand ring. We used to get up and walk them around and exercise them.
Did they see the best of him in America?
No. He never struck his top form there. He won a match race at Tanforan. He only beat one of the best sprinters in that side of the coast, but the best horses in those days were on the east coast. Then we went up to Seattle, and it was heavy rain. The going was heavy, and Wanuka was lucky to win there, really, because he wasn't a good horse in heavy going. And then we went across from there to Laurel Park, and at Laurel Park, the first time he ran there, it was in an open race, and a fellow called Sonny Workman, who rode a horse called Mate, he stood us, as soon as the gate went up, he stood us all in a heap.
Did he?
Yeah, had me laying on top of another American jockey called Earl Porter, who was on the fence. And poor old Earl, his foot was chewing along the fence, and we were lucky to stand up, pair of us. So when we pulled up, Earl Porter said to me, he said, that goddamn Sonny Workman, he said, he's always pulling those stunts. I said, well, he didn't, he was after me, you know. He said, I know. Anyway, he won the race. Then a week later, Wanuka ran again at Tanforan, and he ran badly. And I said to a good friend of mine, another American jockey called Duke Bellizzi, I said, I don't think my horse handles this track. He said, a lot of horses don't. He said, if you're going to Pimlico, he said, it's a much better track. He said, Tanforan, it's a heavy dirt, of course, but he said it's a heavy, what they call a heavy loom. He said, a lot of horses don't handle it. Where at Pimlico, it's a light loom and a hard surface underneath. And he said a lot of horses go much better there. Well, we went to Pimlico, and of course, Wanuka wins the Baltimore Handicap there. And he flew over the ground.
Right.
And
so that was more like the real Wanuka.
Yeah, and a week later he was in a weight for age race there, and he cantered in. And Earl Porter said to me, he said, that's one of the best horses I ever saw. He said, he's brilliant. I said, yes, but he's still not in his top form.
And this was about a year after Far Lap's win in California, in Mexico.
Yeah, that's right, yeah.
Well, the Yanks mightn't have seen the best of Wanuka, but how would you rate him at his absolute best? You won a futurity stakes on him too,
Yeah,
didn't you?
yeah.
Yeah.
I rated him in about the same class as Chatham. I've maybe had the bit of the edge on Chatham. He was he was a top class mile, you know, like he won the Doncaster with 9:13 on his back.
Mm. Well, back in Australia, didn't take you long to get into the big time again. You won the 1934 Sydney Cup on Broad Arrow, and in the spring of that year you rode the same horse in the Melbourne Cup. Not many people realise you got to ride in 2 Melbourne Cups, and on Broad Arrow you ran 4th to Peter Pan.
We got knocked rotten too.
Was that the wet day?
No, yes it was.
Heavy track, yeah.
Heavy track. Derby rode Peter Pan.
Mm.
But it was quite a big field that day, and you know where the horses come down the straight, there's a false rail there at the home turn these days, and it's moved as the horses go by, they move it so they can come out of the turn.
Didn't have one then?
Didn't have one then, and 4 of us, Billy Hickey, myself, we all got pushed in, and I was going for the inside rail. I had to snatch up. I'd have run... I don't know that I'd have beaten Peter Pan, but I'd probably run second to him.
He was a good stayer, Broad Arrow.
Yeah, good stay.
What was your other cup ride?
A horse for Paddy Quinlan. I can't remember the name. It was my first cup ride.
That was earlier?
That was 2 years earlier. Yeah, that was in 32. I'd won the Moonee Valley Cup on a horse called Uramba, and Darcy Eccles wanted me to ride it in the Melbourne Cup. And I was engaged to ride this horse for Paddy Quinlan, and my boss wouldn't let me off.
Yeah.
And Uramba ran second to Peter Pan.
Well, in 1935 you embarked on an amazing adventure for a young jockey from Australia. You took off to India. You started initially with an expatriate Australian trainer called Alec Higgins. Then you rode for the Maharaja of Kolhapur, then the Maharaja of Kashmir, and then you formed an association with the Maharaja of Baroda, a man you grew to respect. You liked him a lot, didn't you?
Champion fella. The Maharaja of Kolhapur was a good guy. Never signed an agreement with him, shook hands. With Baroda, never signed an agreement, shook hands. With Kashmir, the secretary of the race club said to me, when you ride for Kashmir, to have a signed agreement.
Get it in writing. Yeah. Baroda was a great sportsman, Edgar, wasn't he? He loved all kinds of sport.
Yeah. He could play billiards or pool or any of those sort of games. He was one of the top tennis players in India. He was he'd ride horses at pig sticking, and he had all those sports. I went tiger shooting with him one time. We rode for miles over mountains to get to where this tiger was.
Yeah, he loved the challenge and the chase.
Yeah.
Well, it seems to me that racing in India in the 1930s was pretty healthy, and I know a lot of Australian jockeys rode there.
Well, India in those days, both Bombay, Calcutta and Madras, there were 3 centres. They were on the par with Hong Kong is today, you know. There was plenty of money about. The Maharajas had the money, and they spent it on horses. They liked a good time, and it was quite you could earn more money in a year in India than you could in a couple of years in Australia.
Now, Maharaja of Baroda owned a very good horse in this era called Golden Fawn, one of the best horses you rode anywhere in the world.
I would say so. Yeah, he was. I understand he was a 3/4 brother to Mahmood, who was an English Derby winner, and he was a horse. He brought him to Australia to win a Melbourne Cup without any problems.
Now, he won the famous Eclipse Stakes, India's biggest race. You won that more than once.
I won it 4 times, and I won it twice on Golden Fawn. He won it back to back. One year and then the following year.
The Maharaja of Baroda had one other passion apart from horse racing, and that was his collection of white birds, birds representing many and varied species, but they had to be pure white, and he kept them all in one of his palaces.
Yes, a palace in Baroda called Makapura Palace. There were always white birds. The pigeons were white, the peacocks were all white, and chickens or anything, all white. He just had the, as you say, a fetish to have white birds in this particular part.
Yeah, and many of them were imported at great expense, I'd imagine.
Oh, yeah, they'd all be, a lot of them would be imported.
Mm.
But I think peacocks were a native of India, I don't know.
Yeah. Edgar, how wealthy were the Maharajas of India in that era?
I don't know, but when I got to England with Baroda, he had £3 million sterling in the Bank of England.
You've answered the question. And we are talking about mid-40s.
Yeah.
So Baroda got you to England, and so began 14 wonderful years. 14 years you wouldn't swap for £1 million.
No, I wouldn't. I have a few regrets, you know, like us all. I've got a few things that if I could handle them again, I'd handle them a bit better. But apart from that, no.
I said in my introduction that had you spent your entire career in Australia, you would have been as big a name as Cook and Munro and Thompson and all of the others. Are there times you wish you'd stayed home?
I came back from India one year and Frank Daunton wanted me to stay and ride a horse called Silver Standard. He ran second in all the cups. I might have been lucky enough to have ridden him and won a couple of them, you know. And but he was a good horse, Silver Standard. But then it would have been other opportunities I probably would have had. But you can't be in two places.
No.
And in those days, it's not like today you can fly to Hong Kong and come home the next day, sort of thing. You took 2 and 3 weeks on the boat. It used to take us 3 weeks to get to India on the boat.
Well, it wasn't long before you assumed a prominent position amongst England's top jockeys, and you were enjoying a good lifestyle, and you were driving a pretty nice car, as this photo indicates, a Jaguar. But later on, you scored an even better one from the Maharaja of Baroda. It was a Bentley.
That's right. Well, when I was riding for him, he said to me, he'd bought this Bentley when he'd arrived in England, but it was a 1940 Bentley because there was none being produced during the war. And after the war they'd started up again, and he said, I've ordered a Bentley for myself and Her Highness. He said, when they come, he said, that car's yours. Well, I never ever fell out with the Raja, but I fell out with his wife, and, you know, it became domestic, so I got out of it. And so I thought, well, there goes my car, because the new Bentley hadn't come through at that stage. But about 6 months later, his secretary rings up the phone. She was a girl that I knew quite well. And she said, His Highness said to tell you, his Bentley's in the garage. She said, the logbooks are in it, and you should come and collect it. So I said, all right, it's 10 o'clock at night. I said, all right, I'll be down in the morning to collect it. I'll come down tomorrow after racing. She said, if you take my advice, you'll come down and get it tonight. The Morani doesn't know anything about it.
So you did?
So I hired a car and went all the way from Newmarket right down to the other side of Epsom. He had bought a place down there at Epsom, and it belonged to the late Sir Malcolm Campbell.
Of Bluebird fame.
And the Bluebird was still in the garage.
Well, Edgar, you wrote your autobiography in 1967, a lovely little book called Post Haste, and I've never forgotten the opening words. The purple and scarlet silks with their gull braid lay glistening in my hands that sunny day at Newmarket in June of 1948, and I tried to tell myself I wasn't nervous, merely apprehensive. But I was excited. There is no doubt of that, although I had ridden in thousands of races all over the world, in Australia, America, India, and here in Great Britain. These were no ordinary silks. They belonged to King George VI of England, first gentleman of the great British Commonwealth of Nations. You must have swelled with pride and some emotion.
Yes, I did, because racing opens a lot of doors, and well, we were brought up in the old Empire standards, and the ride for the King was the highest in the land, and probably one of the highest in the world, and it certainly gave me a lot of pride, and I was pretty happy about it.
And the King we refer to is the father of the present Queen, the late King George VI, who died in 1952.
Yeah.
He never wanted the throne, Edgar, did he?
No.
It was thrust upon him when Edward abdicated.
That's right, yeah. But he was a really nice sort of person. And when you met him, you'd be surprised to know what he knew about racing.
That's right.
Yeah, he was very knowledgeable, knew a lot about breeding, and he knew quite a bit about race riding, because when we came to this Black Tarquin business in the Gold Cup,
using pacemakers,
the King came down in the enclosure, came across to Captain Boyd Rochford and myself, and said, "I hear Lord Derby's got 2 pacemakers in this race. They intend to take the edge off Black Tarquin's speed." And we said, "Yes, that's right." He said, "Can they do that? Is it fair?" And Boyd Rochford put it on to me. He said, "What do you think, Britt?" I said, "Well, I guess if we had a Lissadon in our stable, we'd be doing the same thing if it was reversed."
Yeah.
And the King said, "Well," he said, "I'm going away to watch this race," he said, "with the greatest of interest."
Did you get to meet other members of the royal family?
Not at that time, but lots of times when they had runners, often the Queen, who was Princess Elizabeth, and Princess Margaret would come into the enclosure.
As teenage girls?
Yeah, and they were both lovely looking girls, and the Queen knew quite a bit about racing in those days, and so did Margaret. They're very interested in their winners.
To racing men of all ages, the Edgar Britt story is a fascinating one. So much so that we're not going to try and squeeze it all into one episode. For the first time, we're going to present a story in 2 parts. Be sure to join us again next week when we continue with more marvellous anecdotes from the life of a true racing legend, Edgar Britt. Until then, many winners.